Hey, what's going on guys? Arekkz here, welcome back to another video for Monster Hunter World Iceborne, and today I want to go over and recap all of the weapon changes that we've seen thus far. This past week we've had 14 different videos showcasing little teases of some of the new stuff, some of the new spice coming to the weapons. However, thanks to some additional information that came out on the Japanese Twitter account, we actually have some more details on some of the weapons, things that I didn't get to include in my original video. So today I want to round up all of that, give you guys everything you need to know in one place. So if you do enjoy this, then a like would be super appreciated. Comment down below, let me know what you guys think, let me know if you guys have got any questions, and also let me know what is your favourite thing you've seen thus far. And of course, don't forget to turn on those notifications so you don't miss any of our future Monster Hunter content. We're incredibly close to E3 now, and I'll have plenty of stuff that you guys definitely won't want to miss. Now, before we even start on the weapons, it's important that we first turn our attention to the Clutch Claw. This is a new addition in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. It's a secondary function for the Slinger. The Slinger can now turn into this claw. You can use it to grapple onto monsters, and in doing this, you actually have a number of different actions. Number one, you can just grapple onto them and you can change the direction that they're facing. You can use this to face them towards environmental objects and then unload your Slinger ammo to send them reeling into those, and in doing so, you can then knock them down. Alternatively, whilst mounted, you can then perform an attack. Each weapon has an attack they can do whilst mounted, and in doing this, you can drop Slinger ammo. Now, it's worth noting that every single weapon will drop Slinger ammo, even the heavier ones. You see that in some of the demonstrations. But one of the other things worth noting is that this also introduces a weak point system, which is new for Monster Hunter. Weapons that attack in this mounted state create a temporary weak spot on a monster, and then subsequent attacks in that same location will deal more damage. Now, it is worth noting that all weapons do this to an extent, but the heavier hitting weapons, specifically the Greatsword, Hammer, Hunting Horn, Lance, Switch Axe, Charge Blade and Heavy Bowgun, will create this weak spot much easier and will have more chances to damage it more easily. Meanwhile, the lighter weapons, while they can still do this to a lesser extent, their value will be more so in the speed at which they can extract that Slinger ammo. They can all do it, again, so you can still be a Greatsword and grab some Slinger ammo from mounting, but that is essentially how it works. So now you have value in grappling onto the monster outside of just looking stylish. You can actually line this up and work well with your team. You can go on, jump on, create a weak spot, everyone can then pile onto that same location, and it'll be incredibly valuable. In fact, it's also worth noting that when a weak spot has been applied, it makes it harder for attacks to bounce, and it's also extremely effective against hard parts and destructible parts. So this could also be a great way to, say, cut tails. If you apply a weak point to a tail, then everyone piles on that location, it's going to be much easier to cut those parts. So I cannot wait to see the strategies this brings into play. It's also worth mentioning that if you then do send a monster hurtling into an environment by firing your Slinger ammo into it, after it's got weak points, those weak points will also get additional bonus damage, plus it'll also take damage to the location that was hit. So keep that in mind, because that of course applies to every single weapon. Now for the Greatsword, the two things worth calling out here is that there is an improvement to the True Charge Slash. The way that it works is that if you hit a monster's weak spot with the first hit of your Charge Slash, the second and third hits will then deal more damage. So essentially, if you are lining up that big meaty chop, then it pays to ensure that that first hit lands, as opposed to, say, potentially shoulder tackling to cancel it, because you can then maximize your damage output towards the end. Additionally, the Greatsword has access to a strong shot, so the Slinger is incredibly important in Iceborne, and while all weapons have the ability to use it while their weapon is drawn, some weapons have access to a stronger shot, which is better at making monsters flinch. For the Greatsword, following an attack, you can then perform this strong shot, which again has a higher chance to stagger, which can then help you line up those big meaty chops. For the Longsword, it introduces the new EI moves. There are two. There's basically an EI slash and an EI counter, essentially. They may be named differently in the final game, but the way they work is that the first one, if you connect with a monster, for a limited time, it will automatically fill up your spirit gauge for you, which will of course allow for, more spirit attacks, things like that. However, if you perform the EI counter, it'll consume a level of your spirit gauge, but you can then go into a powerful attack, as you see towards the end of this video, and it appears, based on the video, that you can work this in at any point during your combo, which gives you plenty of options to maybe cancel out of potentially dangerous situations, and you can then follow up from it after. Also, according to the information released, if you land this attack, it suggests that you don't consume the gauge, so it may be one of those high risk, high reward situations where if you mess it up, of course you lose meter, meanwhile if you land it, it of course allows you to carry on, and you also won't flinch whilst doing this. Additionally, following your spirit slashes, you can also work in a strong Slinger shot, which again helps flinch and create openings. For the Sword and Shield, it of course has that brand new move whereby following a roll, following certain attacks, you can then go into this uppercut with the claw, as I've called it the Clawyuken, and in doing this you can grapple onto the monster, But in addition to this, the sword and shield is the only weapon that can freely use the power shot from idle without having to have it follow a move. And it can also swap freely between normal shots and power shots. So they mentioned before that the sword and shield will have a trick up its sleeve that nothing else can do, and this appears to be one of those things. Essentially, every other weapon that has strong shot, it needs to follow a move, but for the sword and shield, you can just line this up and fire it out whenever you need. Additionally, this new fast combo we saw at the end has a much higher proc rate for status ailments, and if you get the timing right on the combo, you'll do increased physical and elemental damage. So it's basically going to be one of those things that if you can time this correctly, you can work into your combos, you can get some great value out of it. Of course, for the dual blades, most of it was already shown in the video that we saw. You now have the ability to freely dodge and fire slinger ammo at the same time. So of course this is going to be really nice for, repositioning. Looks like there's some great iframes on those dodges, so you can use this both strategically to fire out slinger ammo, but of course also just to evade in situations where maybe you lose your window. But in addition to that, whilst in demon mode, you can also go from your combos straight into a grapple. You can work that mid combo, and of course then finish up in this fancy air flip attack. So basically dual blades is all about that style. For the hammer, as I mentioned in my original video, it's worth noting that you can use your slinger mid-charge and it will not interrupt your charge, it will merely pause it, so you can then resume your charge afterwards, so you can charge up to max level 3, fire out a slinger shot, but it's also worth noting that if it's done after a charge, it is actually a strong shot, so again, giving you an opportunity to flinch the monster, giving you that opening to land that charged shot. And of course, everything else we saw from the previous video, the ability to do that cartwheel spin after a grapple is incredibly satisfying. For the hunting horn, you have the new Echo Wave attack and note. When you play this, it will generate a special note that will of course go on your music stave. When you play a song that uses the Echo Wave note, it'll actually give you new effects, plus it will leave a bubble on the ground. And if you do an encore, it'll produce a stronger version of the bubble. The bubble is basically a residual song that people can then run into to get bonus effects. The example they gave was that if you're a hunting horn user and you run into this, it will give you movement up. And if you're a non-hunting horn user, you will get evade up. So incredibly useful if you're fighting something like Bambaro, who happens to have like a log running your way, then that might come in handy. For the Gunlance, we got the incredibly awesome look at the new Wormstake Blast. This is a crazy explosive module that you can impale into a monster, and the way this works is rather interesting. When you shell it, it ignites it and it triggers little explosions, and those explosions will differ based on the number of shells or the types of shells that trigger it. So of course, if you're firing an individual shell, you get, little explosions. If you were to unload all of them or fire a charged shell, you'll get bigger explosions. But in doing this, you're also priming the explosive module, because after a period of time, the Wormstake Blast will explode and it will then do damage, but it does more damage if you have hit it multiple times. So essentially, the way you play with this is you put it into the monster, you then attack it, you trigger multiple explosions, so that eventually when it does blow up, it does the maximum possible damage. For the Lance, it's worth noting that behind this new counter for the shield, you have the ability to fire your slinger. However, this, in a similar vein to the sword and shield, only this time it's behind guard, you can also swap between normal and strong slinger shots. So if you want to line up a flinch, again, you can switch that strong one and you have a much higher chance of flinching a monster. Plus, following the Clutch Claw counter, you actually then get a little bit of knockback protection, so that way, following a grapple, you won't get thrown off straight away, which, is kind of useful, because in a game where they're kind of introducing this mechanic where you can grapple onto the monster, if you spend half your time getting thrown off, it's going to be kind of frustrating. Then for the Charge Blade, a few things worth mentioning here. Again, after your guard, you have the ability to use a Strong Shot. You can also use Strong Shot in Axe mode, but by default, if you're just using it in Sword and Shield mode, it will just be normal. You can again cancel the Super Amped Element Discharge into the Savage Axe Slash, but a few more details on this. While your axe is in this powered up state, if it's an elemental type, then your buff will last longer and you'll deal more elemental damage. Meanwhile, if it's an impact type, you'll have a shorter duration, but you get more physical damage. And the files will deplete over time whilst in this mode, so it is definitely a limited time mode that you are in. For the Switch Axe, it's worth noting that you can again perform a strong shot after certain axe attacks, so much like the Charge Blade, if you're in the axe form, which is often seen as the lesser form, then you basically have access to the strong shot. However, the new finisher that is done in axe form puts you into a special reinforced state, and when you're in this state, it makes it easier for you to flinch monsters. So essentially this comes after doing multiple swings of the typical stamina depletion move, and then once you do that, you'll see this glow on the axe, and this basically gives you that little reinforced buff, allowing you to flinch monsters more easily. This is actually incredibly exciting because hopefully it puts more value on axe mode. Axe mode is incredibly fun to use with the switch axe, but often doesn't get too much attention given that sword mode is just such a powerhouse. So with this in place, hopefully there'll be a more balanced usage between sword and axe. For the insect glaive, as mentioned, you can of course use your clutch claw mid-air, so you can use the ultimate aerial combos, but you can then take the slinger ammo that you can farm from monsters and use that to buff your kinsect. In doing so, the kinsect can then gather 2 extracts at once. The extracts will also last longer, and depending on the slinger ammo you use, you'll get different buffs. So if you use, say, the slinger ammo you get from the monsters, that can increase the damage of the kinsect and make it generate more dust. Meanwhile, some of the other ones will have different effects. Additionally, the final move we saw, that glaive plant, the one that is much like the dragoon move from the Final Fantasy emote, the part that you hit with that stab is then marked for the kinsect, who will then follow up with that dive bomb attack. Then for the bow, one of the questions that a lot of people have said is, how do you think this will play, given that normally you aim with the bow in the same button that you would normally use for your slinger? The answer is that for bow and bow guns, you'll be able to toggle between slinger and bow aiming on the fly, so that's essentially how it will happen, and you can still do this pretty quickly, given that the bow is a light weapon. Additionally, for Thousand Dragons, in doing this, it'll actually use all of your slinger ammo that's loaded. You can perform this without your slinger ammo, but of course it will do much less damage. So if you're in a situation where you have, say, fully stacked slinger ammo and you perform this, that is where you'll get most of your damage output. For the light bowgun, again, same principle, you can easily toggle between the slinger and the bowgun. There are new mods as mentioned. We have the mod for reloading when you slide, but what became clear after the information from the Twitter account is that the Wyvern Blast counter, the new version of the Wyvern Blast that you fire forward, actually comes from a mod. So you have the option to mod your bowgun so that you can instead fire your Wyvern Blast forward instead of having to stab it into the ground. In doing this, it changes the Wyvern Blast to fire out. It also has a short detonation time, but of course, given that limited window, you need to use it slightly more reactively. For the heavy bowgun, of course, on top of the new super critical range, the ability to equip this special scope, which appears to be not a mod, but actually a special feature of the bowguns, you can then fire from an extended range, and if you actually get the range correct and you're in super critical range, you can deal some massive damage. Additionally, a couple of things worth mentioning is they've improved the Wyvern Heart so that now, if you land all the hits, it basically gets progressively more powerful. That's kind of like a Destiny weapon we've seen before, where if you unload this machine gun and you land all the hits, the more hits you do, the faster it fires, the bigger the damage. Essentially, that's what you're getting. So it's going to pay to ensure that you land all those machine gun shots. And for the Wyvern Snipe, there's the option to remove the pierce functionality, but increase the damage to weak spots. So again, playing onto that weak spot functionality. Lastly, it is worth mentioning there are some new mods for both the light bowgun and heavy bowgun they spoke about. One of them increases the speed of your shots, and one of them increases your pierce shots, making it easier to flinch monsters and whatnot, but it is worth noting you can't use both of those at once. So, there you have it. That's a roundup of all the information we have on the weapons so far. If you missed any of the individual ones and you want to see my reactions to those, you can check out those videos on the channel. But if you missed all of those, then this video gives you a concise summary of everything we've seen and all the additional information you might have missed. So, that's it for the time being. Be sure to keep it locked. It's got plenty more stuff coming your way. And again, E3 is next week. I'm going to go hands-on with the game, and I'll bring back you guys as much information as possible. So if you want to stay up to date on all things Iceborne, then you're in the right place. I really hope you guys enjoyed that video. Remember to hit that subscribe button and also click on the little bell icon to turn on notifications so you don't miss my next upload. Also, don't forget, you can check out 269 and Paradise Central streaming over on Twitch 6 days a week. You can find a link to the multi-stream in the description box down below. Be sure to drop by and get involved. Thanks again for watching. Take it easy. Catch you next time. Peace out.